You're listening to Inside the Village, where all news is local and no topic is off limits.
So help me, Bob, it's bully in the alley. Hey, bully in the alley. So help me, Bob.
Welcome to another episode of Inside the Village, brought to you by Mitch Snedden at Reverse Mortgage Pros. For guides, articles, and info, go to reversemortgagetruth.ca for the week of March 7th, 2023, with Michael Friscolanti, Editor-in-Chief here at Village Media. I'm Scott Sexsmith. That sounds authoritative. Editor-in-Chief.
I'm still captivated by your intros. I just listen and, wow, that guy's good at it.
I'm captivated by your presence.
But now I know you're lying.
There's a shovel in here somewhere that could be digging some stuff. We're back for another week. Lots of great stuff to cover today. Going to have an interesting conversation regarding a new survey that has come out that basically says, according to young Canadians, we're doomed.
We're doomed. It was a depressing headline. We had to talk about that one on the show for sure.
All right. Before we get to that interview, let's talk about a couple of headlines that have crossed our desk in the last 7 days. A few weeks back, we had prominent Toronto criminal defense attorney Alison Craig on talking about bail reform, and bail reform is now back in the news.
Yeah, the federal justice minister has been listening to the provinces who want some immediate action done on this, obviously in the wake of the OPP officer who was killed allegedly by someone who was out on bail. It's been something they've been asking for. Apparently, on Friday, the Justice Minister is going to meet with his provincial counterparts to talk about bail reform. As we talked about in that episode, that's a very difficult thing to get your head around, right? Because a lot of people are saying, we can't release anybody. If you're charged with a serious crime, you should be staying in jail even for years till a trial happens. But the bail system is really a juggle, right? It's really trying to balance like the idea of, is this person should this person stay in jail this long awaiting trial? What are the circumstances of the case? What are the chances they're going to be convicted? There's a lot at play here. I think because obviously the average person doesn't spend a lot of time in bail court and understand sort of all the things at play here. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that meeting. I'll be watching it close.
And a big shout out to Allison, who we think is still in Halifax.
Yeah.
Because she was headed for 3 months of lobster,
Yeah.
and of course a trial that she was working on. So hi to her. A few weeks back, we had digital expert Cy Huda on to talk about ransomware. Of course, in Sault Ste. Marie, the school board, one of the school boards went through a situation where some information was obtained illegally. Now, Chapters Indigo just went through the same thing, but they had a very unique response.
Yeah, I love this story. They won't pay the ransom. They said they were slapped with the ransom demand and they won't pay it. As far as they understand, it was no customer information was taken. It was just employee information, and they've decided that they don't want to be part of helping a criminal organization or a terrorist organization or whoever it is, this group that's demanding this money, and they're saying we're not going to pay. So they're basically taking their chances. I guess they're telling their employees, you know, we'll get you credit monitoring and make sure everything's as good as it can be, but they're not going to pay. So in a way, I think it's gutsy, right? Because you don't really see a lot of organizations, including the school board up here. They were pretty quiet about what happened, and they're not giving a lot of details. But basically, Indigo's saying we're not going to pay.
And wasn't that Cy's advice, if I recall? Didn't he say in that situation you shouldn't pay?
You shouldn't pay. That's right. I think what's different about this is you rarely hear the company or the organization come out and say what they did, right? In the earlier years ago, when this first started happening, we did hear organizations, universities, for example, say they did pay, right? But I think, this is the advice they're getting. I think in each case they have to sort of assess what's the damage, right? I mean, if every customer who ever bought anything at Indigo, their data was captured, maybe they would have thought differently, who knows? But I think they're able to keep this in-house and hopefully take care of their employees as best they can. And they're saying we're not going to pay. I mean, I think it's good because, you know, I don't think we want to be paying these guys.
No. Sioux Today reporter Ken Armstrong recently reporting on the rising costs of obtaining ambulances.
Yeah, this is a good story. Ken Armstrong's story has been published in different outlets across the chain as well. Basically, he's going to a DSAB meeting and seeing the information come out that ambulance costs are really rising. And part of it's because some companies have merged, and so every community across the province, including in our markets, they're going to see that the rising costs of ambulances if they need to buy new ones for the hospital. So it's an interesting read, digging a little deeper beyond the daily stuff. So it's definitely something you want to check out.
And finally, Frisco, just a tragic story covered and written so eloquently by our very own Nikki Cole on the tragic death of a framer who was working in the Blue Mountain area.
Yeah, I talk about this a lot, Scott, but in local news, we cover the stories in our community. And sometimes that means covering really tragic, heartbreaking stories in our community. And this is one of those examples in the Blue Mountains where a young man was part of a framing crew, suffered a serious injury, and passed away. Was in the hospital for a few days before he passed away. And, Nikki Cole reached out to the family and they spoke to her. And really, in these types of challenging times, you want to tell the story of the person who they were. And she did a lovely job. And, it was one of those stories that brought a tear to my eye when I read it. And I sent her a note because this guy was just a fantastic person, young father. They just had a child, recently married. And, in a story like this, all you can really do is tell the community who this wonderful person was and what the family's going through. And I think that she did a great job of doing that. And, that is part of our job as local journalists to cover these kind of stories. And our goal is to do it well, to do it properly.
And she did just that. And beautiful picture of the family.
Yeah. Definitely. Our hearts definitely go out to that family.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we're going to take a break and come back with Dr. Ellen Field. She is the Assistant Professor of Education at the Aurelia campus of Lakehead University. We're going to talk doom and gloom. It's next when Inside the Village returns.
Are you over 55 and considering a reverse mortgage? Receive the free guide that shows you how reverse mortgages really work. Reverse Mortgage Pros, providing trustworthy advice to help you make the right decision. To learn more, visit reversemortgagetruth.ca.
Welcome back to Inside the Village, brought to you by Mitch Snedden at Reverse Mortgage Pros. For guides, articles, and information, go to reversemortgagetruth.ca with Village Media's Editor-in-Chief, Michael Friscolanti. I'm Scott Sexsmith, joined on the line today by Dr. Ellen Field, the Associate Professor of Education at the Aurelia campus of Lakehead University. Dr. Field, welcome to Inside the Village. It's great to have you.
Thank you for having me.
We read an awful lot of headlines, as you can imagine, in this business. And when you read one that says many young Canadians think we're doomed, it raises an eyebrow or two. Can you tell us what motivated you to do the recent research that you did?
Sure. So in 2021, there was an important and influential study that was published on rates of climate emotions that young people experience around the world. There was over 10 countries included and 10,000 young people, and Canada was not included in that data. And so my co-investigator, Lindsay Galway, who's the Canadian Research Chair of Socioecological Health, we decided that we needed to run that data, that survey, in order to collect it for Canada so that we can also monitor change going forward, recognizing from our own experiences the high levels of climate anxiety that we had experienced among young people that we work with.
How did your findings compare to that research?
So similar, the Canadian findings relate to other countries that in general have high greenhouse gas emissions, also have it's very similar findings to the U.S. and Australia, where they also have complex settler colonial relationships and climate policy that you may want, most people would want to be more ambitious, or young people in many ways will want it to be stronger. So
if you're just looking at some of the numbers, right? I mean, nearly half believe that humanity is doomed. 73% think that the future is frightening. 76% think that people have failed to take care of the planet. I mean, those are pretty shocking when you read it like that. Is that how you guys felt when you got the numbers back? I am a researcher in this field, and I am a teacher educator. I teach environmental education and climate change education, and I do a lot of workshops with teachers. And it's not shocking in terms of the types of things that teachers are saying around that their students are experiencing, and not just beyond climate anxiety in terms of, in general, declining mental health among young people. So there was a recent research study that came out from People for Education that also identified the increasing declining mental health of young people coming out of COVID-19, and also the reduction in supports in schools for mental health. So I think there's a number of factors here. That other study, though, didn't consider climate anxiety in terms of the experience
that is one of the contributing factors to the declining mental health of young people.
Yeah, I was wondering that to bring you into the bigger picture with the mental health picture as well. It paints a very dire picture in a lot of ways, right? It makes me scared. I mean, I have children, not quite 16 yet, but they're younger. And it worries me that young people are so down on the future.
Yes, for sure. And it begs the question, and how our research is different from that large international study is we wanted to know from the young people who were identifying, the respondents who identified these difficult climate emotions, what help would they like? And so we asked a question around, in schools, what mental health supports would be helpful? Or in general, like what are some of the supports that would be good for them? And some of I think this is an emerging area. In general, teachers, when we think about schools, PD generally goes to numeracy and literacy. There's some PD on social emotional. Does it go to climate change education and the social emotional dimensions of that? I haven't heard of it in Canada yet. And so this is a space where I think we can have some intervention in terms of helping teachers develop some of these skills and strategies, as well as potentially other spaces that youth might need that aren't in classrooms, because sometimes often young people aren't comfortable necessarily to share their negative feelings in a classroom. They might need a different kind of space.
Doctor, I'm curious. Do you feel these results have always been there? I mean, you mentioned COVID-19. Do you think that COVID and the situation that everybody has gone through, has that brought this more to the forefront now that younger people are through it for the most part? Has that really shone the light on things?
I see them as I think COVID-19 definitely, it impacted all of us, and it definitely impacted young people who are at a time of important socialization and identity development. Climate anxiety and the ways that understanding both the risk and uncertainty of what the climate crisis poses, and also not having faith that government is going to be addressing it properly, is a real cocktail to sort of work through in order to have a hopeful orientation about your future. So I think there's many factors which are playing into declining mental health, and the economy is one as well, in terms of the generation squeeze that young people are experiencing.
Again, I wonder if that's all part of it as well, right? These are the same generation people are wondering if they're ever going to be able to afford to buy a house one day,
right.
If they're going to be able to. Some of them are even saying in your survey they're not going to have children because they're so concerned. That all plays into it too, right, Doctor?
It does. And I think one of the important pieces is that when young people see adults in their community taking action, that has amplifying effects. And so part of what we know is when young people see adult actors acting and taking action on a situation that, like climate change, that helps them build societal trust. And so the fact that we see such high levels of betrayal, that young people identifying, feeling that they're not protected, and they have a sense of betrayal, is concerning, because then they don't feel cared for. And that's what we need to make sure that young people feel cared for, so that they aren't also having this feeling of isolation and not a hopeful future orientation.
Mm-hmm. And I guess the silver lining in the research is you see some numbers that 71% of respondents believe that together we can do something, and half of these young Canadians believe that they can contribute in some way. Does that give you some hope?
Absolutely. And I think also we hear it often around young climate activists and the skills and capacities of these young people and the vision that they have. And not all young people are climate activists. The kinds of work that are coming forward from many climate leaders is amazing. I get to work with many different youth groups that do this type of work. And I think in the paper, we talk about the importance of adult allyship in terms of adults taking action, taking leadership, not passing this on to young people as a burden that they have to carry in isolation, but also finding ways that we can include them in participatory ways. And so things like youth councils for city governance, and doing that in a true participatory way that doesn't sort of do it in a tokenistic way, but actually includes them in decision making and policy making, because their voice is so important in these policy decisions that will affect their entire quality of life in the future. And if you look around the world at youth plaintiff cases where young people have taken countries or cities to court, in general, they win based on the intergenerational injustice on a human rights basis. And so that legal precedent is growing, and it's increasing that young people don't have to take their city or their province or their country to court, and that they're included in the policy making, and so that we do get strong climate policy that safeguards our future.
Mm-hmm. Doctor, you mentioned young activists, and certainly where climate change around the world is concerned, no greater activist than Greta Thunberg. Is she looked upon as the one that can, help get us out of this mess, not just by young people, but by all of us?
I mean, Greta's actions were amazing and created an entire movement. I think that movement was already developing. And Greta herself says, don't just focus on me, focus on all of the climate activists around the world, because it is a collective, and they see that work as collective based. And I think those spaces are very important for young people, especially those who are feeling, a lot of the negative climate emotions. Those third spaces can help them get connected to like-minded others, get connected to community members, and not always do just protest, but also be engaged in policy making and actions in their community.
Professor, how do you hope policymakers see these headlines or read this study? What do you hope a politician takes out of this?
I hope they take a moment and consider their own policy record, and really consider, what their term is and what kind of change they can make to ensure that they are taking every action to safeguard young people's futures.
Is there anything that we didn't ask you, either about the survey or climate change in general, that you wanted to cover today, Doctor?
Just that I think we are in an incredible moment in time. History is being made, and I think we're all very tired from the pandemic, and it's really important that we take the time to rest ourselves still, but also take action in the spaces we can, and not just, zone out on Netflix and sort of kick things down the road further, because it all matters leading up to 2030, and we are increasingly getting close to those windows of opportunity to create these changes.
Well said, and some great advice. Dr. Ellen Field, Associate Professor of Education at the Aurelia campus of Lakehead University. Thanks very much for joining us today.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Reporters, editors, and journalists who go the extra mile to get the story and get it right. Go behind the scenes with those who cover the stories that matter most to you and your community. Look for it in the Village Features section of your favorite Village Media website across Ontario.
Back to wrap on Inside the Village, brought to you by Mitch Snedden at Reverse Mortgage Pros. For guides, articles, and information, go to reversemortgagetruth.ca. While you're online, by the way, flip us an email, itv@villagemedia.ca. Seriously, flip us an email.
This guy is checking the email every hour on the hour. Please, can somebody write him? He will write you back.
You know what? Derek will write you back. Frisco, one of us will.
No, Scott will write you back. I promise.
Truthfully, it's likely going to be me. But
and speaking of Scott, did you notice that Scott LG said nothing to us about how we pumped him up on the podcast? So he clearly did not listen last week.
No, he did
going
not.
to the end. I don't think anybody even said anything to us. I'm starting to wonder if anyone in the office is listening.
Well, I think they were afraid to mention to Scott that that he was a subject, on the show.
Like, I don't think anyone has ever praised that guy more than we did that last week, and nothing, crickets.
All right, that does it for Inside the Village for this week. Don't forget back episodes at insidethevillage.ca, across the Village Media Network, and wherever you get your favorite podcasts, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Google, you name it, you'll find us. Derek Turner will also be back next week, executive producer of the show, Michael Friscolanti, editor-in-chief, and I'm Scott Sexsmith. Thanks for watching and listening. Talk to you next Wednesday.
You've been listening to Inside the Village.
Frisco and Scott's Wardrobe, provided in part by Moores, Sault Ste. Marie.